Dang.
You know, I speak from experience. Gigabit is awesome.
Oh, it is. I mean, so I was coming from 12 megabits down. So I'm in the middle of nowhere. Like I have cows. If you exit my neighborhood and you go down the street, there's cows. Like
same here.
Mm-hmm.
Right outside my neighborhood's apartments. It's pretty awesome.
As a developer, you love building things that are fun and that matter. Me too. Do you want to add authentication to yet another app? Do you want to stay updated with all the security issues and patch them? Why not leave it to the experts? Auth0 is the easiest and fastest way to implement real-world authentication and authorization architectures into your apps and APIs. Allow your users to log in with either regular username and password, social identity providers like Facebook and Twitter, or enterprise identity providers like Active Directory, Office 365, etc. Or without passwords, with an email login like Slack or phone login like WhatsApp. Getting started is very easy. Add authentication to your Ruby app or Rails app, Sinatra, and others in less than 10 minutes by writing only a few lines of code. No credit card required. Get the free plan or try the enterprise plan for 21 days at auth0.io/Ruby Rouges. That's the number 0 in Auth0. Auth0 is trusted by developers at Atlassian, Mozilla, Bluetooth, Optimizely, Financial Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Try it out at auth0.io/Ruby Rouges. Remember, that's the number 0 in Auth0, and get back time building core features. Hey everybody, and welcome to another Ruby Rouges podcast. This week on our panel we have Dave Kimura.
Hey everybody.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that's Amir Rajan.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Now, Amir, you've been on the show before, but do you want to just kind of remind everybody who you are, what you do?
Yep. So I swear every time I come on the show, it's something different as far as what I'm doing. But at my core, I'm still a game developer. I'm probably the most successful Ruby game developer in the world. Of the two of us that are probably out there, I'm the most successful one. And I'm also now the owner / CEO / steward of RubyMotion, which is a platform that allows you to write Ruby for mobile devices and Mac. So that's been a quote unquote recent development for me. So game dev / company person, company owner person / occasionally still do .NET. Even today, I still find myself picking up side gigs doing .NET development. So I can't seem to get rid of that little side itch.
Right. And, we had Laurent on the show a while. I want to say, I'm saying a while, but it's been years, to talk about
It's been years,
RubyMotion.
yeah.
And, it's just such an interesting project. And then I got the email saying, hey, it's been acquired. Amir is running it now. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So I reached out and said hello, and you're going to be speaking at Ruby Dev Summit. And I was like, we should get you on the show and just talk about, where this is now. Mainly for the reason that, when we talk Ruby, we're usually talking like web development, and occasionally we get into DevOps or something, or careers or things like that. We almost never talk about this mobile option that people have if they want to keep doing Ruby and start doing mobile development.
Yeah, I mean, and it's one of those things that I think the entire, I guess, non-Rails Ruby community really wants to bring light to. Just talking about Ruby Kaigi 2016, when I was over there, they in their talk submissions, they explicitly said, do not submit talks about Rails. We will decline your talk. And the reason behind this is that they want to show people that there are things past the web, right? For Ruby as a language, and its underpinnings didn't come from the web. Its underpinnings and its where it originated from were very not web scenarios. So just being a part of that Ruby world was something of a resurgence for me. Like going to Ruby Kaigi and seeing the not web Ruby that exists out there was one of those things that was like, wow, this is what Ruby is right here. Mm-hmm. So you hear people generally saying like, oh, Ruby's dead, or and I think about it myself sometimes, like, is Ruby dead? Is it dying and whatnot? But then you see all the not web Ruby that's out there, and kind of the innovations and kind of like the things that the envelopes that we're trying to push in different ecosystems, including mobile being one of them. It's really cool, and it's one of those things that was eye-opening and really humbling for me. So so you can use RubyMotion, you can use Ruby on mobile, and it's exactly what you expect from being able to use Ruby. The Ruby, the language. I know we talked in a previous podcast about like the aesthetics of Ruby, and I've worked very hard. Laurent has worked very hard to try to capture those aesthetics outside of just what most Ruby developers experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I've actually built a few apps on RubyMotion, and at first it is, especially if you come from just being a Rails developer, like if that's how you're introduced into Ruby, it's really kind of eye-opening to see it used in a different way other than web development. I've done other things aside from RubyMotion and Rails with Ruby. However, initially getting started with RubyMotion, I started out when it was like version 2 something. It was
that was very early.
It was a long time ago. And, I've had the pleasure of maintaining that application over the years, getting it upgraded and, getting it working with the current iOS requirements for the App Store. And it's been an interesting thing. And I think one of the things that made it the most pleasurable is not having to worry about the dev certificates. That yes. The motion provisioning package that you guys created is amazing. I had to, switch Macs a couple of times, and every single time getting that certificate reinstalled and get it working correctly with RubyMotion was always a pain. But once you guys introduced the motion provisioning, which basically just asks for the Apple ID and your password, it goes out there, it fetches it, it does the provisioning, everything, so you don't have to worry about it. It just makes it to where you could just get in there and start programming.
Yeah, and one of the other interesting things with regards to just this kind of stuff is it is so frustrating why Android and Google and Apple just don't provide sane things. It's like, why does it have to be so incredibly complicated to even get something on my device? So this idea of what Ruby tries to convey as a language, we try very hard to lift that up. Mm-hmm. And we're not the only ones. There's a GitHub repo, open source GitHub repo out there called Fastlane, and Fastlane is basically what we're leveraging to download provisioning profiles and various things like that. Inside of Fastlane, you have even the ability to upload to the App Store, set your description, set your screenshots without ever opening up iTunes Connect, and how painful it is to use that damn web interface. But it's like one of those things. It's a part of me, and this is across Android and iOS, but it's frustrating to see, like, it's been a decade. That's how long it almost feels like a decade since the iPhone came out, or since we started getting into the smartphone world, and we're still dealing with things this way. And I feel with regards to mobile development and I guess not web, I think Ruby can still make a really strong mark from the perspective of that first video that DHH did with look at all the stuff I'm not doing, mm-hmm. and everyone just felt like, oh, Spring and Java was just the way you're supposed to do it, and it's still like that. It is insane, but it's still like that on in the mobile ecosystem, where it's like you just use Android Studio and you just use Xcode, and this is just what you have to do. And there's this, relatively speaking, small group of people that are like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. And it's just exciting to be part of that group.
Yeah, absolutely. And RubyMotion, how long has that been out now? It's been 5 years, 6 years.
I think I can't remember exactly when it went live. I started using it back in 2013. So that was the transition when the first non-skeuomorphic, or like the flat UI became the thing. But I think RubyMotion in development, Laurent started with MacRuby, which is an open source project while he was working at Apple, and started development almost 8-9 years ago. So that's where I guess RubyMotion forked off from. So it's been a very long time in development. Yeah. And just when you personally, when I acquired that code base, quote unquote, acquired that code base, and you open it up and it's really, really humbling to see someone's work over such a long period of time in such a very difficult realm, I guess, right? Because it's not writing Ruby, it's not writing in Ruby, it's writing Ruby, building Ruby, and from my perspective, that was one of those things where, wow, like I've been standing on the shoulders of giants, but I did not completely understand how tall those giants stood, and getting into that other side of the world and kind of seeing what all was built up by Laurent and everyone else on that tool chain is it was eye-opening for me. It felt like one of those like quote unquote greater purpose things where I'm part of a bigger community outside of just the Ruby community. So that was really cool too.
So it's interesting because if I remember right, RubyMotion statically compiles to a runtime that the iPhone will run, right?
That is correct. Yep.
So, I mean, yeah, and I'm sure you're solving some of the same problems that virtual machine authors are solving, except you're coding against LLVM.
Correct.
So, yeah, I mean, what does it take to, just to dive right in, right? What problems are you solving that we're just not thinking about? What kinds of things are we going, hey, string.reverse, and we don't think about, oh my gosh, there's so much, shoveling memory around or whatever that happens on the other end.
Yeah, it is. So that was one of those things that was like a quote unquote rude awakening for me. I thought I understood. Oh yeah, language creation compilers. And you think about let's say CoffeeScript, right? It's like, oh, it's a transpiler. How hard can that be? But
famous last words.
Yeah. How hard can that? It's just a transpiler. It's like, I got this. And you really start digging in, and you kind of what I found was I was reliving everything that Laurent went through with building our RubyMotion, and by extension, if you think about like what Mats went through when initially creating Ruby, the inspiration to create a language, and the aesthetics that Ruby has in itself is one of those things where it's hard to comprehend, and then let alone writing the facilities and all the features of a language in in essentially a language that doesn't support these features, right? That's what the virtual machine is. So I mean, you're seeing you look at the Ruby source, and if you're a Ruby developer and you've never built Ruby from source, and you've never looked at the Ruby source code or how HereDoc is implemented, try to look at that, right? Try to figure out all the things that were needed to implement something as simple as multi-line strings. And it puts you in a perspective. It gives you perspective on how much there is to really understand out there. So yeah, at its simplicity, RubyMotion is a statically compiled implementation of Ruby that compiles down to LLVM bitcode. So I think it's worth a crash course to talk about LLVM if we want to take this tangent.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so LLVM stands for a low-level virtual machine. And the reason that
is Crystal implemented on LLVM as well?
I would be surprised if it isn't, right? There are so many things that are being implemented on LLVM now. It's really taking off as like a compiler tool chain. So LLVM is essentially a compiler tool chain, and the idea there is that there are two things that you need they split it up in a way where you need two things to compile something and put it on a CPU architecture. So if you look at mobile devices, those are ARM64 as of right now, ARM64 devices. So LLVM says, okay, we're going to provide you compiler backends. So as long as your quote unquote compiler front ends emit an intermediate representation called LLVM. We can take that intermediate representation, then compile that to bitcode that will run on all these CPU architectures. So before LLVM existed, if you wanted to create a language that runs on ARM64, you would be creating the language, you would be creating the parsers, and then you would be creating the essential bitcode to run on that specific architecture. And then someone comes to you and is like, hey, we would love to run this on, this other XYZ architecture. Well, good luck, because now you're going to have to, re-implement that backend. So a low-level virtual machine, it's a compiler toolchain that basically splits the compiler world into two separate things, the front ends and the back ends. Mm-hmm. So RubyMotion, in essence, is a compiler for LLVM that happens to compile Ruby code. And then there are already available compiler backends that allow you to release on any number of architectural devices. The reason this is so cool, so if you think about WebAssembly, you hear WebAssembly coming out, it's like, oh, you can use any language and deploy to WebAssembly. The problem is that you have to basically compile WebAssembly bitcode in essence, right? Mm-hmm. And then the question is like, crap, I got to create the language, I have to create the parsing and the bitcode, the virtual machine bitcode, so that WebAssembly can run it. Well, with LLVM, you don't have to, because there's going to be a backend. They're already developing a backend for LLVM that can go to WebAssembly. Nice. So this idea of Ruby moving past just the server, if we have an LLVM backend for it, that opens up the ability to say, if your language compiles to LLVM, your language is all quote unquote automatically supported for WebAssembly. And that's like one of those quote unquote wow moments. That was one of those quote unquote wow moments for me, was understanding, these little nuances to what it really, really means to build a language and actually have it deployed to a chipset architecture, right? Mm-hmm. So incredible stuff. Really, really incredible stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it was really sad for me too, because you start getting into that quote unquote world, and there's not a lot of information out there to do this, and the reason is that the people that can actually do this stuff, relatively speaking, is just a handful, right? So they don't have time to do blog posts and screencasts and all those other things that we just readily expect from a language, right, or a tool chain. So you have the official website, but then from there you're on your own. You're on the GNU message boards or variants of that, and you're trying to. If you say, hey guys, I want to, please help me get started, they're going to be like, screw you, we've got work to do. But there's only a few of us, and we're trying to manage all these chipset architectures. Clone the repo, figure it out, just like we did. So it was one of those like sobering experiences from the perspective of they're not necessarily angry or mean. They're just really busy, mm-hmm. and they're trying to carry the burden of the world on their shoulders, and just there's not enough of them. People have come to me on the Slack channel for RubyMotion saying that, oh, Amir, what happens if you get hit by a bus or something? What happens to RubyMotion? I don't own the IP, so it's worth putting this out there. I don't own the IP for RubyMotion. So in any situation where I can't run away with it, so there are specific clauses and requirements inside of the acquisition stating that if I ever dissolve or move away from RubyMotion, it must be open source under a permissive license. There's no possible way I'm allowed to just walk away with it. So there's a kill switch, quote unquote, built in. But aside from that, when people ask me, it's like, oh man, Amir, what's going to happen if what's going to happen in RubyMotion if you win the lottery? Let's say not hit by a bus, but win the lottery. And I'm like, you're worried about me. Think of all the guys that are maintaining the ARM64 backend compiler backend for LLVM, and worry about them, because they're the guys that are really making anything I do even possible. You think about OpenSSL, same deal there, right? There's one, and what was the heartbeat exploit or whatever?
Heartbleed.
Yeah, Heartbleed. There were hundreds of people talking about, oh, the if branch was the issue, and it's like, no, the issue is there's only one guy maintaining it, and there's not enough people out there that are carrying that burden. But it was interesting to see that world, and it really puts everything that we take for granted as high level language users into perspective. So there's my spiel on LLVM, I guess. Does that mean any thoughts on that, or like comments or worries or variants?
No, the whole LLVM's way over my head.
You should dig in, man. So
no,
if you are interested, yeah, I know. But if you are interested, if you go to llvm.org, there's a toy language out there called Kaleidoscope, and it's a 50-page like wiki. I mean, it's a 50-page write-up. It's brutal. It is brutally difficult because you're learning how to create basically a language, the parser, the abstract syntax tree, et cetera, for a very simple language that only works on doubles, right? Math operations doubles with functions and branching. But you take that in and you get through that, and you think about what, like, again, Matsumoto had to go through to actually create Ruby. And then you go to Ruby Kaigi and you see the contributors to Ruby, all 20 of them, sitting on the stage, and you're like, holy crap, like this is it, right? These are the only people that know how to write this, how to write these kind of things. They
need a designated survivor, I swear.
Yeah, like seriously, like and as Ruby developers, I think it's our responsibility to understand one level below Ruby. I mean, the languages itself. It's one of those things that I think it was the biggest mistake that Ruby developers have made, is that we're in this walled garden, but that's not good, because we are the designated survivors of of that core team. And it's open, it's out there, and it's just one of those things where you just got to kind of dig your heels in and dig in.
So where do you go to get started then? I guess that's the real question.
I'm not telling you, figure it out, right? I mean, that's what they'll say. I mean, from the perspective of like, the source code is out there, right? Ruby source code is out there. It's on Subversion. Clone it, try to get a building, and try to kind of understand. Just read the code. I think a part of it is like read the code, try to understand all the nuances of language creation. You might have to pick up some books on language theory. The LLVM Kaleidoscope application will kind of give you a heads up on how do you create abstract syntax trees and all those variants. But the really cool thing is that there are key like RB define method, RB _define _method is a C function that is part of the Ruby runtime. So again, there's very few people that could spit out like all the runtime methods off the top of their head. But at the same time, I think just starting with the header files and reading the header files would be one of those things where, okay, now I kind of understand all the nuances and all the things that had to be created to support this runtime, let alone the implementation. But I think that'd be a good place to start. It's our responsibility, right? You get Superman cape and everything. So I'm hoping Ruby developers that listen to this, at least at a minimum, clone the repo and start reading the header files.
So let's say if you're a bit more simple-minded like me and you want to get started with RubyMotion, it's been out there for some time now, and there's been other companies and other parties that have created gems for RubyMotion. Like Red Potion is one that kind of creates a Railsy-like framework for developing a RubyMotion app. And there's a few other ones out there, but a lot of them seem to kind of like die down and just no longer get maintained. So if I'm starting out with RubyMotion, what is the ideal path or the ideal way to go from start to finish with, like, here's the gems that you really want to use, here's the ones that you kind of want to stay away from or just use caution with? Is using the interface builder and the outlets still a preferred method or a good method?
et cetera, et
Can you
cetera.
talk about
Yeah,
that
definitely.
kind of stuff?
And this, I guess, goes back to like again the reflection of the Ruby community as a whole is that we have to get out of our walled gardens, and I think that was one of the initial. I mean, it's really fun to build a new framework like RedPotion. RedPotion is still very, very popular. So if you want to do quote unquote walled garden RubyMotion, pick up RedPotion. Bubble wrap is another big one that you want to look at, and then AF motion for your HTTP interop. So those are your three, I would say your three big ones that you want to pull down, and then you can go to town on it. But this idea of a walled garden, and this is something that, of course, I've struggled with and to think about, is that the RubyMotion community is part of the greater mobile community. So if you think about like just the Objective-C libraries that are out there, one of them is called Masonry, and that's primarily what's used for like layout, your auto layouts, and all those things, iOS devices. And Masonry is really what we as Ruby developers, RubyMotion developers, should contribute to, because what we're trying to bring to those libraries is the aesthetics of Ruby, like the APIs. So Objective-C as a language is surprisingly a fantastic language. It's just that a lot of like the APIs and a lot of the like namespaces and class names are so arcane. They feel too enterprisey, or they feel kind of old. And there's nothing stopping RubyMotion developers or Ruby developers contributing to those APIs, even as an issue, saying that, hey, you know, this would be a lot more idiomatic, quote unquote, idiomatic mobile or idiomatic Ruby, if you, instead of calling this thing, UI touch-up event inside, right, or some ridiculous event call, just call it tap. And kind of
I love
push,
it.
right? Yeah, it's like UI touch-up event inside, and it's like, you're kidding me, right? That's the event name.
Sounds kind of dirty.
No comment. That is an official UIKit API, by the way. This is ridiculous.
Yes, I know.
It's called that. But yeah, tap. I mean, why is that so hard? And then start pushing these conversations down to these quote unquote bases. So from my perspective, moving forward, I would like to, say that the community itself has to push down to these kind of libraries like AF networking, Masonry, Cocos 2DX for game development. There's so many wonderful, very, very robust libraries out there that do a lot of this stuff for us. And we just have to contribute to those. Same on the Android side, right? But I guess that's the long and the short of it.
So getting into, I mean, we're going to, I guess, come at RubyMotion from here's the deep end of how it all works instead of here's RubyMotion, here's how you write apps in it. We'll probably eventually get there in the show. But so how do you, is it that complicated then to pull in like another LLVM language like Objective-C or Swift, where, you brought up AF networking, right? Which I believe is written in Objective-C.
Correct. Yeah. And that's the great part of RubyMotion is that it's actually native, unlike React Native, cough, cough. We can talk about React Native too. I'm sure that's one of the questions, but
JavaScript
it's
bridge,
actually native.
blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Blah, blah, yeah, right. Everyone says React Native. I'm like, you don't understand what native is.
It's closer to the metal. It's closer to the metal than like Cordova.
Yes, it is. It is.
And I think that's the idea. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just CocoaPods. So you just reference it, and in essence, because it's an Objective-C runtime and it's an Objective-C library, it quote unquote just works, and you just get those APIs inside of RubyMotion. With regards to Swift, the interesting thing with Swift is it's funny because Apple is actually going through all the things that RubyMotion went through with regards to interrupting with the Objective-C runtime. So you start looking at the Swift repo and you say, haha, we had to do that too. Welcome to our world. But with regards to interrupting with Swift, they have to inherit from NSObject. So they have to be visible to Portable C, in essence, and Objective-C and the Objective-C runtimes to actually leverage those libraries.
Does RubyMotion not have to then?
So RubyMotion cannot directly interrupt with Swift. The Swift libraries that are out there must inherit from NSObject for RubyMotion to actually be able to leverage it.
I see.
Yeah, but so by extension, and here's the interesting conundrum for all of iOS is that everything is built on Objective-C, right? Same thing with React Native. If you want to do React Native, you can't leverage Swift libraries. You can try, give it a shot. You won't be able to. And it's the same thing, is that the entire mobile world relies on these portable runtime, this portable C runtime and this Objective-C runtime that exists out there. So it puts Swift in an interesting place, because if you want your Swift open source library to really take off, you have to make it interoperable with portable C in some way. And that's one of those requirements that are going to start coming down the pipe when larger and larger companies say, hey, we'd love to use your charting library, or we'd love to use XYZ library, but we got to use it through Objective-C. You got to expose, those little bridge points for us, so we can, we can leverage it. And you're going to start seeing that. You're going to start seeing that a whole lot. There's just too much ocean to boil there.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that was kind of one of the things that I found out about RubyMotion. You can be the best RubyMotion developer, but unless if you find a really awesome gem like Bubble Wrap to interface with the iOS APIs, you really kind of have to be able to read and understand their Apple's documentation on the Objective-C to really, be able to leverage those. So,
absolutely. And, it's one of those things where, and it's something I've reflected on. It's a criticism, across the board, saying that, I would like to use quote unquote idiomatic Ruby APIs to do this stuff. And what the quote unquote solution that was taken was, okay, we'll just wrap everything, right? And create modules and wrappers and facades on all the nastiness. And the real solution should have been, from a decade ago, it should have been pushing those aesthetics down to the languages we leverage, the greater mobile community leverages. And we would have, as a mobile community as a whole, we would have been much further along with productivity if only the enlightened Ruby developers, push some of those things downward. So now we get to try again. And it's unfortunate. And there's really no good answer. So, just to talk about React Native, once you get into the React world, it's fantastic, right? The React Native world where you can use the JSX files and whatnot. But if you want to actually leverage a CocoaPod API, you have to create the bridge, right? So that bridge has to be written in Objective-C. You're going to be building you have to wrap the methods you want to expose to React Native and class macros, like class macros, terrifying C, class macros, or C macros, and that's what you got to do the bridge. And we're feeling that pain across the board because people just didn't take the time to say, hey, we want this API to look somewhat sane. Pretty please with the cherry on top. So yeah, you have to understand the APIs. You have to understand the UIKit APIs. You have to understand the APIs you're consuming. Mm-hmm. And the quote unquote, the harder, more, I guess, servant perspective thing is to not start a new shiny project, but to, dig your heels in again and contribute to these underlying frameworks that everyone depends on. And that's it's a lot harder to do. I was saying we're going to be doomed to repeat the mistakes we've made before, right? As a Ruby community as a whole, if we keep, trying to do this. So,
yeah. This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/Ruby Rouges. So how many of these APIs look like Ruby, and how many of these APIs look like Objective-C, UI, touch up inside, blah, 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 crazy stuff?
Yeah. So unfortunately, the majority of them look like the former, or the latter, the one at the end, right? AF networking, though, AF networking is an Objective-C API, and if you look at it, it's really pleasant. I think that's one of the ones that shines very, very well outside of all the other iOS APIs that exist out there. And it takes a very functional block-centric, callback-centric approach, similar to what you would maybe see in Ruby, or like a request from REQWEST, right, or jQuery, or variants of JavaScript. But AF networking is, if every library looked like AF networking, I think across the board, a lot of the mobile developers would be much, much happier. It's just not the case, right? Unfortunately. Yep. But AF networking is a great example of what I would love to see all Objective-C and Android libraries look like.
So RubyMotion does Android as well, right?
Yes, it does. So actually a darkroom was only on iOS, and I would say it's been a year now. It's finally been a year that it's been on Android. So iOS, it's approaching 3.1 million downloads on iOS, and on Android, it just passed 350,000 on Android. So as far as like battle hardened, ready for production, I mean, I'm using it, right? That's one of the reasons why I took it over, right? Why I took RubyMotion over. But yes, it is cross-platform, and that has its own issues, right? So you have a layout engine that's for iOS, and now you need to do Android layout. What does that look like, right? And it's completely different. So my ADR engine, the backend, I was able to leverage the game engine on both, and that saved me, I guess, a good 15,000 lines of code. But the 5,000 lines of UI code back then, I had to kind of rewrite. And that was not fun. But it's again that same mistake that we made was instead of pushing maybe like quacks like a duck APIs on both sides, we didn't, and here we are, unfortunately.
Yep. Interesting. So what's the difference then? I mean, are you kind of JRubying it on one side and LLVMing it on the other side, or how does that work?
It's actually the same. It compiles down to, in essence, C on both sides. So
okay.
Yeah. So it's the same ARM64, chipset architecture, et cetera, et cetera. There are two compilation tracks. So you're right. There's Java compiler on one side, and then the LLVM on the other side. So, but it works, and it's great. And hopefully, as time goes on, we'll see. Maybe Android decides to actually start using LLVM also, and stop using their horrible, horrible virtual machines that they've created. It's bad. It's bad on Android. But we digress. But hopefully, those things converge. I'm also excited about maybe seeing a convergence between RubyMotion and mRuby, embedded Ruby. Seeing those kind of things evolve and converge would be fantastic, right? I would love to see that happen.
Yep.
So as far as like just getting started, right? We went all the way into the bells of LLVM, and we didn't even talk about like, so what do you do? So basically you install Xcode, and then there's a starter edition of RubyMotion, which is free, completely free. You can deploy to the App Store. You'll get a splash screen if you do that. You'll get like the Powered by RubyMotion splash screen, similar to what you would see on Steam or anything. But you can target basically iOS 11.0 and then SDK Android 7.0. We're working on 8.0 right now for 64-bit on Android. but you just download it for free, and then you after you have Xcode installed, you do motion create your app name, cd into the directory, and do rake device or rake simulator, and it will fire up the iOS simulator, and you have your Hello World application. So that's the quote unquote essence of getting started with Ruby. So continuing down this route, one of the differentiators with Ruby relative to I guess other quote unquote competing platforms out there is that I've got the business acumen to really understand what it means to make a successful mobile app. So it's not if you're a company, right, and you want to create a mobile app, you have two options. You're either going for reach, customer reach and engagement, or you're going for monetization. So when you're looking at monetization, iOS is the way to go, right? It's almost not worth doing Android at this point. So you vet your monetization product, whether it's through in-app purchases, rewarded ads, subscription-based, upfront, what have you. You go iOS and you make your product, and if that revenue number divided by 4, anywhere from 20 to 4, is worth you going back and creating the Android version, then do it. Otherwise, you just stay on iOS and build your next app. Now, the other option you have is this idea of reach. And when you're looking for reach, you don't want to create a native application. You want to create a wrapped, responsive website that has some nuances and some variations of interacting with native components, maybe the camera or accelerometer or what have you. Mm-hmm. But what you want to emphasize on is engagement, is getting people to come back to your application. So from that perspective, it's not the UI or the app that you really care about. It's really push notification and seamless login to where I don't have to register to visit your website if I use your application, right? So all those nuances and all those frustrations of registration and verification links and passwords should go away when I'm using your mobile experience. And push notifications and that seamless login process is what's going to give you that engagement that you want. So while all the quote unquote other companies out there are pushing for cross-platform, look at these awesome controls, I'm looking at it from a business growth standpoint. You've got two ways to grow, and the RubyMotion platform codifies those quote unquote two ways to grow. How do you increase conversion rates on reviews? How do you increase conversion rates on rewarded ads, seamless login, et cetera, et cetera? And that's what's really, really important in this business now. And it's ever evolving, and you got to be in it. You got to be in the game to really, really comprehend what sets one mobile app apart from another. So that's the differentiator for RubyMotion from why you would choose that over something else.
Now, is that a focus, or is this an approach that changed when you acquired it, or was Laurent well down this road already?
Yeah, this was an approach that changed when I acquired it, and specifically because I've acquired it in a world where it's bring your own language, right? Mm-hmm. Anyone can. I mean, you can quite literally. I think you can write Perl. You can write a Perl. You can application in Perl or some variant of that. Or basic. Was it basic? Free basic? Or I think it was actually covered in one of your previous developer stories. But it's crazy. It's absolutely insane that you can write mobile apps in something like basic. But It is a world of bring your own language at this point. So the differentiator is no longer, we can do cross-platform development. It's really looking at trying to capture what makes a good mobile app and what makes a successful application and a deployment in this new world. And no one's thinking of that, and it's unfortunate. Well, it's fortunate for me, I guess.
So if there's some people out there who want to just really see the power and possibilities of RubyMotion, even though it can pretty much do anything that a Swift application can do, what are some of the popular apps out there that are made with RubyMotion? Because at the App Store, you don't have that visibility because it looks like and feels like just a native application, and it is.
Yes. And that's true. So with regards to applications out there, of course, I can speak to my own, a dark room and a dark room for Android. I can't disclose applications of other companies, but on the website we do have that the page that says, you've got your success stories online and other applications that are built out there. But from the perspective of just a darkroom alone, that's the runtime. The RubyMotion runtime is on 3% of devices out there. And, it doesn't sound like a big number, but 3% is 3 million devices and growing is pretty big. And the other biggest thing out there is that the companies out there that are being run by, CEOs, they don't have apps with 3 million, they are not in charge of apps with 3 million users. Yes, they're in charge of a product, but they really need to understand, the business aspect of it, of what it really feels like to be a developer that has to maintain these things. You just don't have that, unfortunately. So it's being used, definitely. I'm not the largest RubyMotion code base, surprisingly. I guess combined, I have 75,000 lines of RubyMotion code. I sent out surveys. On average, RubyMotion code base was anywhere from, let's say 1,000 to 3,000 lines. The largest RubyMotion code base out there right now is about 115,000 lines, one application. Wow. So very, very large. I mean, and that's probably like at least 10 million lines of Objective-C, right?
Yeah. Did you tell them about the drive principle?
It's just a large app. I mean, but yeah, they're very, very large Ruby applications out there, RubyMotion applications. So it's used. It's definitely one of those things. We also have a Slack channel, and I'm really present in the Slack channel. So if you want to have like a one-to-one, or if you want to talk about your app idea, I've had conversations with people just saying, hey, this is a good app idea, or here's how you want to change it. And it's one of those things where you'll see the underpinnings of the community once you come to the Slack channel.
Yeah, so I recently had some family in town, and I figured it was a good time to write a translator app, because they're from Japan and I don't speak Japanese. So, I decided to give RubyMotion a break and pick up Swift, and to just, try to build a iOS application, a translator that would just leverage the Google Translate API, and it would then use the natural language processing to dictate the text and then speak it. And I got it working. It took a couple of nights, but it was a pain. Just the error messages that Swift gave, and just a lot of the junk. And it really kind of made me wish that I would have written it in RubyMotion. Having had RubyMotion experience before and just communicating on the network, looping through arrays and stuff, and Swift, it's just a pain. I think it's made great progress from where Objective-C was and previous versions of Swift, but I don't think it's there yet for making developers happy. Is it functional? Is it productive? Yeah, sure, once you get familiar with it, but it's not at that happy developer level yet.
Yeah, and one of those things and I feel good. I'm happy that Apple's moving forward with Swift. They've got a big uphill. Again, they got this huge ocean to boil. Their own products, let alone everyone else that has Objective-C out there. One of my frustrations with Swift is the same thing. It's like try to take a Swift 2.0 code base and try to upgrade it to 3. It was not fun. It is not fun to do, and you have quote unquote horror stories of people trying to go from 2.0 to 3.0, and it's just, I feel bad, right? I feel bad for them, and of course I'm like, haha, like Ruby already did all this stuff, and here you are trying to quote unquote reinvent the wheel, but to each their own from that perspective. But it's not fun. It isn't fun, and the other issue is that even if Swift becomes productivity, like really productive and whatnot, those underpinnings, those aesthetics still won't be there. You still have to do your ridiculous app uploads through Xcode. You still have to use Xcode. You can't use any variants of that. JetBrains has a product out there called AppCode. I would, if you're tired of Xcode, try that out. But it's still an IDE, right? It's not going to be something like just Sublime Text or Atom or variants of that. But they're not fixing those really, really annoying problems with just provisioning profiles and crash logs and all the other frustrating things. Try doing a test suite. Try doing like a RSpec style or like a TDD style, implementation. It is infuriating to get working in those kind of environments. So those are the kind of things that I would expect, Ruby developers really value.
Yep. One other question I have is, what's the learning curve like? I know you've written a bunch of RubyMotion code. Dave, it sounds like you've written some RubyMotion code. Mm-hmm. What's the learning curve like? I mean, I've gone as far as downloading RubyMotion onto my machine, but I've never actually gotten around to doing anything with it.
Yeah, so a learning curve, basically it comes down to if you want to do just vanilla Objective-C, the curve is high because not only are you Ruby, which is great, but you still have to learn like the UIKit APIs.
Yeah, the frameworks.
So the frameworks, which is where the most of your work will go. But what I would recommend is, if you want to get a really simple, real simple front end working that calls an HTTP server, and again, this is for monetization and not just reach. You do Red Potion and Bubble Wrap and AF Motion for your HTTP, and you go to town. And if you want to use CocoaPods instead of the RubyMotion wrappers, you're looking at Masonry and AF networking to give you what you need there. And from there, you just look at the samples. There are really, really good samples out there, really good documentation, and then just come to the Slack channel. You have so much help. You have so many people there that you just say, "Hey, I'm having trouble with XYZ," and they'll jump on that to really help you out. And now that quote unquote Apple Christmas is over, holy crap! I feel my heart goes out to all the mobile developers that had to deal with all the new devices and all the new iOSs coming out. But now that that's over and done with, the RubyMotion website will get an overhaul on its documentation coming next year. So things are moving forward. It's business as usual from my perspective.
Sweet.
Nice. How much work is it to keep up with, they announce a new iOS, do a lot of things change or do not many things tend to change?
Go ahead.
From an end user of RubyMotion perspective, all you have to do is sudo motion update.
Yeah.
And
I envy you, by the way.
It's basically that simple. So how hard can it be? From Amir's standpoint, it's probably hell.
Yeah, Amir has this magic wand that.
Yeah, right. So here's the most infuriating part. Like, I'll give you a story with this. So, iOS or Apple has this, like, they'll move your cheese and they won't even tell you. And the thing is, the cheese that they move impacts every freaking developer out there. It's not just, people using RubyMotion or at all. So one of the cheeses that they moved was, if you try to release an app to the App Store now, you are required to use asset catalogs for your icons. And the frustrating part is that they dropped this bomb on us after the keynote. And the reason is that the asset catalog controls your icon resolutions. So they couldn't release the new asset catalogs that had the new resolutions for the iPhone 10s, because then they would have been giving away that they were releasing a new device. So those asshats waited till they didn't even tell us. You just get an error that says, hey, invalid CF bundle name, et cetera, et cetera. And you're like, what the hell is going on? Why can't I release my application or go live with it? And it was because it was like, you have to have asset catalogs now, and you need this new icon that needs to be 87.5 pixels by 87.5 pixels. Good luck, migrating all your apps over. So it is frustrating. It is so if there's not a new device release and it's the same resolutions and whatnot, it's surprisingly painless. We have a good CI box that does a whole ton of regression and can auto deploy all the packages and all the things. But this was the perfect storm. So pro tip: never acquire a company and then let Apple release a new device up from under you, and and then high Sierra that has additional, private APIs that they're gonna push onto us. That was definitely the perfect storm there. The cool thing is that you look at some of the header files and the APIs that are on High Sierra. The 2D face plane or whatever is on the OS. So I fully expect the 3D projector stuff, projections, and all the AR stuff that you would expect on your mobile devices to come to the Mac, because they're already shipping the APIs for that. So it's really interesting to see that. But unfortunately, not a magic wand on my side. Again, I envy you.
Yeah, and back in July, I was testing out with some iOS 10 beta stuff, and they had messed with like the app delegate class or something that made RubyMotion just go all haywire. And it wasn't even a RubyMotion thing. They just like silently did something, and I think it was iOS 10 beta 3?
Beta 4. Beta 4? Beta 4, yes. I remember that night. Holy crap.
And that was horrible. And then all of a sudden, like, a new beta came out and they, like, undid their changes or something crazy. I'm like...
Yeah. So here's what they did. Those guys...
I just did a pseudo motion update and it was fixed.
So Objective-C doesn't have namespacing, right? So that's why you see everything like for React Native, their bridge is called like GDC bridge, yada 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 for their class names. So you prefix everything with an acronym and of some variant, so you don't have class collisions. So one of the private APIs, the way they hooked it up on the devices, so that it only happened on iPhone 7 Pluses. Running iOS 11. So if you're running something that wasn't that device specific, you wouldn't actually have this problem. But they accidentally exposed a private API class called event, and without the namespace. So anyone that ended up creating having a class collision across any CocoaPod, any variant of whatever that happened to have the event class, the process class, and there was one other, and they just like broke everyone on beta 4. So here I am trying to get something where I was like, well, crap, we use process. This is going to be a big deal. So then I went in and subsequently namespaced everything, and then beta 5 it was like fixed, or beta 4 the next beta was gone, and then everyone in the entire world let out a sigh of relief. But that was and they didn't mention in the release notes. It was like, okay, so in the release notes they're going to talk about how they just completely gave every single iOS developer a heart attack, right? No, of course not. Of course they didn't. But that was not a fun time. So hopefully they stop doing that kind of stuff.
Break, heart attack, rollback. It doesn't work.
Yes. So I, of course, and I'm dealing with this too. I'm right in there in the weeds. So I'm spending all day and night after the beta comes out. I fix RubyMotion, I deploy, and I'm like pseudo motion update. Oh, that was easy. And then I go in and redeploy all my apps to make sure that it works when iOS 11 goes GM. And then next thing I know, they fix it in the next release, and I'm like, all right, well, I just lost 35,000 5-star reviews on my apps. Great. Because I did a release. But, it's just be happy that I'm dealing with it and not you.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking one for the team. How many people work on RubyMotion?
So I'm primarily the main person. I do contract out to a lot of the people that originally were on the RubyMotion team with Laurent. And of course, I'll be ramping that up next year once this whole acquisition stuff settles down. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to be getting a new community manager. He's going to manage like the day-to-day, the documentation, all that good stuff. And then it'll be me and a couple other guys that will really handle the runtime and expansion of that runtime.
Cool. Well, I don't know if I have any other questions. Do you, Dave?
No, just thanks for, I guess, the whole community's work on RubyMotion. It is a lot of fun to develop in.
Yep, and like I said, when we started the podcast, I love the product. I could talk about the product all day long, but just as a bigger message to the RubyMotion community, to the Ruby community. Sorry, take a look at the Ruby compiler, take a look at mRuby, take a look at what's behind the curtain, and just and try to increase the bus factor overall, and try to become one of those designated survivors, because we can't, other communities probably can live with what they do, but I think we're better than that, right? As the Ruby community, I think we need to expand past it and really look at what's behind the curtain. It's important.
Awesome. Now, one other thing I usually ask before picks is, if people want to see what you're working on these days, or follow you on Twitter, or GitHub, or something like that, maybe you have a blog, where do they go?
So I actually started my Twitch back up. So every Sunday I will stream game development with RubyMotion. So if you kind of want to just shoot the bull with me and make fun of me using Emacs to do Ruby development, come on to the Twitch stream. And outside of that, I've spent a lot of my time on the Slack channel. So herokuapp.motioneers.com, motioneers.herokuapp.com. That'll get you the login to the Slack channel. And I'm on Twitter at Amir Rajan, AmirRajan. And those are the three best ways to get in contact with me.
All right. Well, we'll put those in the show notes, and let's get to some picks. Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says "Pay me now." And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Dave, do you have some picks for us?
Of course you would ask me that. I guess, one gem that I've been using quite a bit lately that's been really awesome is called Rerun. And it basically just monitors some files on your computer, on your Mac, and it'll restart a service or application based on whatever you have in the Rerun script. And it's really helpful for things like Sidekick, having Sidekick automatically restart if you are changing files that it's could be affecting. That way you don't have to stop it and restart it. So it's been something that's been really awesome.
Nice. I'm going to throw out a handful of picks here. So I had lunch with Eric, who's one of the regular panelists. He's not on today. We had lunch yesterday, and we were talking about Code Sponsor and devchat.tv and sponsorship and stuff. And he was kind of trying to lead me along to a certain conclusion, and finally just gave me the answer. And it was kind of funny because his response was, "You have this problem. You know how to solve it. You're a coder. Go solve it." And so
just go solve it, man. Come on.
Well, it's funny because, I've been trying to handle a lot of this manually or hire somebody to do a lot of this for me. And some of it's complicated enough and automatable enough to where code makes a lot of sense. And so I started working on this app yesterday, and I wound up actually not doing the work that I needed to do yesterday. The life of an entrepreneur, right?
Story of our life, right? Yeah.
So anyway, so I got in and got going on this stuff. And anyway, I found some really cool gems that I am super happy with. A few of these I've used in the past, and one or two of these are new to me, and I was super happy to find them. One of them that made things a lot cleaner and a lot nicer is Friendly ID. If you've used this in Rails, it essentially just creates a slug and then makes querying by the slug really easy. So that works great. I found that it didn't work as great when I had in my routes file in Rails resource instead of resources. That messed that up. Don't do that. But other than that, it's super nice. And as soon as I fixed that, it's like, oh, look, it's all working. I just spent an hour trying to figure out what was wrong with this. The other gem that I found that I really like, and this one I didn't know about before, is Ice Cube. That's ice_cube. And what it is it sets up a recurring, so you can set up recurring schedules, so recurring events, and it'll create all of the objects for you. And then there's another gem that's built on top of it called recurring select, recurring_select, that will actually add to Rails basically a recurring drop down, so people can set up recurring events in your app, and then it just serializes the recurrence rules into a hash format and sticks it into your database in a text field, which is very nice. And then you can just pull it out, rehydrate it, and create a whole bunch of event objects that aren't persisted until you decide to persist them. And so anyway, really, really happy with that. And there was a video, I think it was on Go Rails, that walked through using it. So I'll put links to all of those in the show notes. But it made this a whole lot easier. I was trying to figure out how I wanted to design this and build it from scratch, and it turned out that it was like 80% done, and then the Go Rails showed me how to do the rest. So anyway, really, really happy with that. Amir, what are your picks? So
finally, I get to talk a little bit about games. It was like this entire podcast we weren't able to talk about video games. Come on, man. So I've got so this is a PlayStation 4 game. It's called Nier Automata, and if you haven't played it, just get this game. And if you don't have a PS4, buy a PS4 and then buy this game, because it's one of those games that I think will go down as a game of a generation. It's that good. So Nier Automata is on my list, and I have two game-related podcasts that are really great. One is called Idle Thumbs, and if you just go on iTunes or anywhere and look for Idle Thumbs podcast, they do a great job of like just talking about a whole swath of games across PC, console, mobile, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's one more called Literate Gamer. And Literate Gamer, they actually, instead of reviewing games, they actually critique games. So they take a more, more high society approach to looking at games and talking about games, and kind of treat it as almost like an art form. So it's really cool to listen to them. One of the past podcasts, they had the producer of BioShock talk about why he got into game development and his passions around building and being a producer and coding and all that stuff. And it hits home. It really hits home, especially if you ever try to build a video game or decided to get into development because of video games. So those are so Nier Automata, the game, get it. It's freaking awesome. And then Idle Thumbs and Literate Gamer, great gaming podcasts.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming, Amir. It was really cool to talk, and I kind of. So I'm going to ask you to come back, because we talked about doing Ruby on mobile and all of kind of the innards with RubyMotion, but I'd love to talk to you about that aesthetic of Ruby that you talked about, and just see if we can definitely dig in and put our thumb on what some of the parts of that are, because I think a lot of us like Ruby and, the way that it feels to write, and it has that feeling to it, but I don't know if I've ever seen it like picked apart and, oh, this is it, or this is part of it. So
yeah, and I would love to explore that, because it's fundamentally changed how I code as a developer, right? Very few languages I can say like have really fundamentally changed how I code, and I think Ruby is one of those languages.
Awesome. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up, and we will catch you all next week.
All right, talk to you later.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.